UFOs are a Swiss Army knife for intelligence. They can use them for anything. He was seeing lights like out somewhere on the base, like lifting up off the ground and then flying over a mountain and going down. And they were just glowing orbs. And he said that he could look through binoculars and sometimes see like Air Force people or somebody walking around them before they took off. He built apparently a setup and started listening to transmissions coming from the base. He said there were dinosaurs and like old like Roman battles and stuff. The Air Force had taken him in a helicopter, flown him up to northwestern New Mexico, and showed him stuff saying, look, we think there's something going on here. And they actually put jeeps and like water tanks and all kind of stuff in this place as props.
And then he starts to kind of lose his mind? Is that right? Or
yeah, as things get worse, he went there with a camera and took pictures. Benowitz was there with like a rifle and a pistol, and he said, you know, they're coming, you have to come in the house right now.
The idea that UFOs are a cover for just prosaic technology is totally wrong. In fact, it's the opposite. Prosaic technology is often used as a cover for UFO. It's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, probably both. In fact, it's demonstrably both. Imagine the Benowitz operation as a 24-hour-long stage play. And Benowitz is 5 minutes in one scene, not even 5 minutes.
I'm here with Greg Bishop, who is the excellent author of Project Beta and most recently It Defies Language. And I know you to be a very hard-headed UFO journalist, investigator, who sometimes reports on things that fly in the face of what the believers of everything want. And the first kind of great example of that is in Project Beta, where you documented this guy named Paul Bennewitz, who's this earnest industry man in aerospace, and he is driven kind of crazy by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, specifically this counterintelligence agent named Richard Doty. And it makes for an amazing kind of dramatic thriller. I'm excited to get into the weeds with you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me. Benowitz wasn't involved in aerospace, and he was already kind of unstable to begin with. It's just the Air Force, AFOSI, and other people just encouraged it and made it worse.
There you
which
go.
is no excuse. But everybody says, oh, he was perfectly okay. No, he was kind of heading down that road. It's just when somebody in power tells you something,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, that must be right. So you just keep, you know.
Well, didn't he have a company that sold components to aerospace?
They still do.
Yeah.
His sons still run it, at least one of them. And Thunder Scientific, temperature and humidity instruments.
Okay.
I think it's humidifiers and things to monitor temperature and humidity in like highly, you know, corrosive or whatever environments, like on submarines or on aircraft or whatever. So he actually had, as far as I know, contracts with the military for these things, along with a bunch of, you know, scientific organizations and stuff.
And he both lives and his office is near Kirtland Air Force Base, like basically across the street, or what's the...
His house is in the Four Hills area of Albuquerque, which is on the border of the north side of Kirtland Air Force Base.
Okay.
And his office was near the Wyoming gate of Kirtland Air Force Base. So at work or at home, he was always like right next to the base. So, and the company's still there. If you go there, there's a big sign, this little sign that says Thunder Scientific. And I think one of his sons is still the president. And I'm not sure if his wife is still alive. Cindy, I think her name is or was. But yeah, that's on, like I said, it's just, if you could walk out his front door and down a street, like 2 minutes, and you're at the fence that says, you know, government facility, do not trespass, all that stuff.
So this is the late 70s. Paul Bennewitz is living and working around Kirtland Air Force Base. What's he like as a person?
The people I do know that knew him, such as Bill Moore, Doty, and Gabe Valdez, those are three people I talked to who knew him. And mostly because I was talking about that period, they talk about him getting more and more frightened about stuff. But I've seen pictures of him before all this started happening, and he's got this mischievous look on his face. He looks like a grown-up kid. I've seen a picture of his application to APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, And he's just kind of standing there like kind of, it's kind of like, wow, that doesn't look like Paul Bennewitz. I think of him as like this scared, paranoid person. But, in the picture, which is just a snippet of somebody, he looks actually pretty happy and funny. There's a picture of him in the Albuquerque Journal or Tribune, one of the two, in 1981 or 2. He looks way different. He has long hair and a big beard, and he's kind of sitting there, and he looks very serious. And it was just a profile of him and his business. But
anything about his childhood, or was he a generally credulous person who believed in other sort of crazy lore growing up?
I don't think so. The only thing I knew about, and I can't remember who I found this out from, is he liked to read Wild West novels.
Okay.
Also, he was a private pilot. He had a pilot's license. Also, I think he did aerobatic flying, which made me feel closer to him because I have a pilot's license too, and I've done some aerobatic flying. But it's just, there's not a lot on his background. People actually said, well, why didn't you get into his background? And what was just your question? And I said, well, nobody that was close to him wanted to talk to me for obvious reasons. Yeah. Because it's like, we don't want to dig that up again.
So he's living and working near Kirtland Air Force Base. Kirtland Air Force Base has an interesting history in just UFO lore. I believe it was managed back in the day by the Sandia offshoot of the Atomic Energy Commission.
Oh, okay.
And so a couple of places where it shows up in UFO lore, just to kind of set the scene for people. Maybe take this with a grain of salt, but you have Bill Steinman, who is a UFO researcher who writes about the Aztec crash, which is a very controversial crash.
Yeah, I have his book. I talked to him on the phone once, actually.
Oh, wow. I want to hear about that because he seemed like a very interesting guy. He was actually, people don't know this, he was a Skunk Works employee, and he was pushed out of Lockheed.
Okay, that I didn't know.
Because he was so interested in this topic. And then he could never really get a job in aerospace again. But he writes about Kirtland Air Force Base with respect to a guy named Eric Henry Wing, because he was interested actually in the Kingman crash, which is associated with Operation Upshot Knothole, this nuclear test in 1953 in Nevada at the Nevada Test Range. And you have this Arthur Stansel, this guy who's on definitely worked at Wright Airfield at the time. And he sees his name in the records because he was this witness of this crash. He sees a body, like a 4-foot body mortared or whatever in Kingman. And Steinman looks him up, sees his name in the record next to a guy named Eric Henry Wing. Eric Henry Wing was head of special studies at Wright Airfield.
He was German,
studied with Victor Schauberger, actually.
Okay, that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And people say, well, why is his name Wang? And I found out, and I think this is true, because of East Asian, barbarians came through Germany.
Fascinating.
And so he had this Asian name. He was German, but he had this Asian name because of, something that happened in the 3rd century or 4th century or something. There were people named Wang that came through there and just kind of
Attila
stayed.
the Hun. And
I was going to say Attila the Hun. I'm not sure he made it to Rome, but Mongol hordes did, but apparently that's where his name came from.
That's wild.
Go ahead.
No, amazing. I love it. I love the historical detours. So his name, he's apparently moved from Wright-Patterson or Wright Airfield to Kirtland Air Force Base. And I believe there's even some sort of complex near Los Alamos that's like named after him. But that's it. Like he's kind of scrubbed from the internet otherwise. Yeah, Steinman,
like most people that do that kind of work.
Yeah. But, Bill Steinman gets in touch with his wife, Maria Wing, and she says, "Oh yeah, he worked at Kirtland Air Force Base. He worked on some, secret UFO related stuff."
Yeah, I think they came and took a bunch of stuff out of his house when he died.
Interesting.
Kind of like that Tesla story where the Navy goes in New York and pulls all the stuff out of storage.
Yeah.
But the same thing, I believe, happened with Eric Wang.
I mean, that's definitely factual in the case of Tesla. So, and then Donald Trump's uncle actually looks at the Tesla files to see if it could confirm anything. Crazy history. But okay, so they raid Wang's house. Steinman speaks to Maria Wing. She says, yes, he's working on all sorts of spooky stuff. And he was managed by Henry A. Kissinger. So that's pretty crazy. And then Henry Kissinger is actually on record doing these like kind of meetings. This guy, Don Cotter, who was head of advanced research at Kirtland Air Force Base, in 1962, is convening these interdisciplinary groups to talk about not talk about UFOs, talk about we don't know.
Yeah.
National defense, security, and geopolitics.
Yeah.
And
Tech or
Kissinger
whatever.
is on record being there. So that's the backdrop. Otherwise, all we know is Kirtland is working on probably advanced aerospace. And at what point does Benowitz start to think that he is picking up some sort of alien signal, or he's detecting UFOs?
I think it's 77 or 8. He was seeing lights fly, and Chris Lambright describes this in his book too. He was seeing lights like out somewhere on the base, like lifting up off the ground and flying over a mountain and going down. They were glowing orbs. And he said that he could look through binoculars and sometimes see like Air Force people or somebody walking around them before they took off. Then they go straight up, go over the mountain, go down. And it's not clear as to whether they were doing things that were unconventional or just kind of doing this. Because if they went zoop and they went like, then you'd kind of like, whoa. So he saw that for a while, and then he started filming it with 8mm cameras, and then later early video. And because of that, and also because he was doing hypnosis with this woman, Myrna Hansen, that said she was abducted or something had happened to her. At that point, Bud Hopkins' book hadn't even come out. So one of the few people that knew about this kind of thing was Leo Sprinkle and also James Harder. There were 2 psychologists, and they both worked with APRO. And as I said, Benowitz was a member of APRO, Area Phenomena Research Organization.
Okay, this is a UFO research group?
Yeah,
or something?
they're in Arizona. It was run by Jim and Coral Lawrence, and who had split off from the Midwest UFO Network, which is now the Mutual UFO Network.
MUFON.
Yeah, so they'd started their own group, which they said I think was more scientific. Anyway, Paul joined them. I've seen his application. It's kind of cool to just see what he was saying about himself.
Anything interesting that he said?
They said, what was it? He just said, I can help with some of the technical aspects. He had a master's, I think, in electrical engineering.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah, and he said that he could help with some of the technical aspects of, if they wanted to, if they had any kind of equipment they wanted to use to start doing what people do now, which is to detect UFOs. And it's been going on for years, but we just gotten to the point in the last 20 years where you can actually have an automatic system that's pretty accurate. So he said that about his expertise, but the other thing I thought was kind of fascinating, they said, what's your favorite UFO book? And he said, books by Hynek. That's all he said.
Okay.
Which is funny because later Hynek apparently visited his house.
Yeah.
And that's how he got in touch with, at first, Leo Sprinkle. And Sprinkle came out to help him regress this woman and figure out what had happened to her. And Sprinkle, after being there, I think the second time he came, he said Benowitz was there with like a rifle and a pistol. And he said, they're coming. You have to come in the house right now. And this was before he even contacted the Air Force, I think.
Wow. So he was already exhibiting signs of paranoia. And crazy.
You know how we're always diving into the edge of science and consciousness on this show? Lately, I've been thinking a lot about aging, not just in terms of years, but in how it actually feels in the body. Slower recovery, lower energy, that middle-aged fog that sneaks up on you. I feel like I can barely go out and drink alcohol anymore. That's why I started using something called Qualia Senolytic, and it's been a major shift for me. Let me explain. As we age, our bodies accumulate what scientists call senescent cells, also known as zombie cells. These are worn-out cells that stop dividing but don't die. They hang around in your body, draining your energy, clogging up your recovery, and generally making you feel older than you are. Qualia Senolytic is a first-of-its-kind supplement formulated with 9 plant-based compounds designed to help your body naturally eliminate these zombie cells. It's not something you take every day, just 2 days a month, but it supports your body in aging better at the cellular level. Since I've started taking it, I've felt sharper, lighter, and like my body's resilience has come back online. It's vegan, non-GMO, and grounded in serious research. Experience the science of feeling younger. Go to qualialife.com/Jesse for up to 50% off your purchase and use code Jesse Again, that's JESSE for an additional 15% off. That's QUALIALIFE.com/Jesse, JESSE, for an extra 15% off your purchase. Thanks so much to Qualia for sponsoring this episode.
So he sees these sort of orb-like things going over a mountain right next to Kirtland.
Yeah.
And then does he detect anything else, like any sort of like signals?
He wasn't at that point. As things progressed, he started putting up equipment to detect signals because he thought maybe I can hear what the aliens are talking about. Because he called the Air Force and said, "Look, there's stuff flying over the base, and I think it's aliens, and I want to tell you about it. And I've got films." And so the base was like, "He's not supposed to be watching this stuff." So instead of telling him, "No, get out of here," that's nothing. It's national defense or whatever, security. They said, well, come on down here and show us what you got. Because they wanted to see what it was. Is it something we're working on that he's not supposed to see? Obviously, it's something we're working on because he's pointing the camera at the base. So I talked to a guy at the NSA who was not there. His name was Tom Dooley. I actually talk about him in the book. But he had a colleague that was at that meeting, the first meeting with Benowitz, where they had all the security people and maybe the commander of the base, I'm not sure, but it's certainly all the security people and some of the military and civilian people, I guess, in charge of different projects at the base because they wanted to see what he's looking at. And he told me by the end of the meeting, everybody started leaving, and by the end of the meeting, there was like 3 or 4 people left because they're like, oh, that's not ours, oh, that's not ours. So they didn't care about it. But the people that were concerned stayed there, and the only one I know of is the guy that was head of AFOSI at the time, I think. And he said, hey, Paul, this is interesting. Why don't you keep telling us what's going on? Because I wanted to see, exactly what he's seeing, when he's seeing it, and then eventually convinced him that he was working with them. So he trusted them. So they could basically tell him whatever they wanted and keep an eye on him. And people keep asking, it's like, well, what did they do that for? And I said it was far more valuable to them to find out what he was seeing, how he was seeing it. If anybody else could do this, even though he was an electronics genius, and who he was talking to. Like anybody could just write him and say, I'm a UFO researcher, what are you doing? And then they could check up on the person. Maybe he's a Russian or Chinese or otherwise asset. So it's basically so they could get a handle into what do these people, who does he know? What is he telling them? What does he think's going on? And of course he tells somebody from, another country, from an adversary, and they'll get clues as to what's being worked on, and they can concatenate that with other information they're getting from other sources. So it's another source of information. So I want to make sure he wasn't some sort of security leak inadvertently, because they didn't think he was an enemy agent or anything like that. They just thought he was kind of a, outlaw, crazy scientist guy, which he kind of was. And in keeping in touch with them, they could keep a lid on that stuff. And that, I think that's why they contacted Bill Moore. It's like, well, you're a UFO guy. If you cooperate with us, we'll give you some secrets. We'll give you some documents. And they did. But
so explain that.
Just about all of them turned out to be crap.
So let's explain that. So Bill Moore is a UFO researcher who's kind of starting to reach peak prominence at that time, I think in 79 or 80.
Yeah, because he had just co-written the Roswell incident. The first book about the Roswell crash.
Which really put it on the map. Before that, it was not, before him and Stanton Friedman, 79 to 80,
yes,
it wasn't
Stan kind of discovered what was going on, and then he helped. He was like Bill's research partner.
That's right, yeah.
Nobody mentions Bill at the Roswell festival. He's why they're doing all this.
Right,
Him and Stan, actually.
Yeah, well, it might be because of his the souring of events.
Which we'll talk about. But he was kind of, really starting to ascend in UFO world as a good researcher. He'd written also the Philadelphia experiment. And he was on the board of APRO, on APRO, too.
Okay.
That was the other connection.
Okay. So he is ascending, and then what happens? Does he get sort of co-opted by counterintelligence?
Yeah, basically. He got a letter that was sent to APRO, and APRO looked at it and said, well, why don't you check this out? It was just basically from this guy who said they were on patrol somewhere in, it might have been New Mexico, I can't remember. But he said, we were on patrol, we saw this UFO, it was really weird, everybody got freaked out, and I just wanted to write somebody. Bill checked it out, and he told the APRO people it's BS. This is somebody's fake letter. It was supposedly a military person that wanted to get this information out. And Bill checked out, and the guy didn't exist. He did find out the incident may have happened, but not in the way the guy said. So he just said, "We'll ignore this. It's BS." And a few months after that, he was on tour doing radio shows for Roswell incident. He was at one radio station. They said, "There's a call for you." He thought that it was a prank call, and he just basically hung up on him. So he goes to Albuquerque. The next stop on his book tour, he goes into the radio station. Same thing happens. Same voice. And he's like, okay, this is a lot of effort to put in for just a hoax. So he started talking to the guy. And they said, if you're interested, come and meet, at this certain time. And so that's when he met, I think the first meeting he had was with Doty and the guy known as, he called Falcon, which was apparently was a retired CIA agent called Harry Rositsky, who has since passed away. And I think it was like...
Do we know anything about him, Rositsky?
Yeah. You go look him up and you will know more than I do, because a lot of stuff has come out about him since I first...
What's come out?
Who he was, what he worked on. His specialty was Soviet operations. He'd come out of OSS.
Okay.
In World War II, and I think he'd worked with Reinhard Gehlen and some of the Nazis afterwards to set up intelligence networks in Europe because of the Russians. And he'd also been in Afghanistan, I think, and it was monitoring Soviet radio transmissions there. He did a lot. He was one of their Soviet experts. And so in the late 70s, early 80s, when the period we're talking about, they pulled him out of retirement to help run this unofficial operation against the Russians and Chinese and whoever else. And they needed somebody from the UFO research community as kind of a contact. So they approached, I think, a bunch of different people, and a few of them said yes, and Bill was one of them.
Do we have any sense of what Doty had? So Doty's obviously going to play this sort of villain role in this whole story. He's the main kind of, Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent who enters Benowitz's life and, plants all sorts of BS and kind of screws with him mentally. Do we know anything about his history up until that point?
Who, Doty's?
Yeah.
I don't know too much about it. All I know is what he said, and it's like, what am I going to do with what he said? He said he was a guard at Area 51. I have no idea.
It's hard to take that at face value.
Yeah.
Well, he also said, I think his father worked at Area 51. Are you familiar with that history? Dolan told me that. Richard Dolan.
Yeah, I think maybe. Yeah, well, Dolan will probably know.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever mentioned that, but he would probably take stories like that and kind of mix and match them.
Another interesting data point on Doty. I know very little about him before the Benowitz story, but he shows up at Mario Woods's case. So Mario Woods is at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota in 1977. He's a missile security officer, and he not only sees a craft.
I see this light off to my east.
He claims that these beings walked up to him. He then gets a hypnotic regression, and he discusses being inside of a craft. He wakes up 10 miles away. And I think it's dawn, so it was like the whole night had elapsed.
Yeah.
And his partner Michael Johnson's in a catatonic state.
I even tried pulling his hand off that steering wheel.
And he has no idea what's happened to him. And he then is debriefed by, a slew of official, people at Ellsworth Air Force Base, and one of the guys is Rick Doty.
Next to him was this new OSI guy named Rick Doty.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because the first time I saw him was on Ancient Aliens. And I said, I know that guy. He was at my debrief.
So that's kind of interesting as well.
What year was that? 77?
So that was like a year or two before.
Yeah, well, maybe if true, that's probably why Doty was tracked into this.
Right.
Because I think he has an interest in the UFO subject.
Because I believe...
Just like we all do. It's just that part of his job was to mess with people concerning it.
Totally.
Which he enjoyed.
The weird part is Mario's is one of the strongest cases. I'm like you. I think a lot of UFO stuff is bullshit. But Mario's, to me, I've spent a lot of time with the guy. It just pattern matches to one of these nuclear cases where clearly there is an overwhelming nuclear pattern that goes above and beyond, in my opinion, the ability for humans to coordinate. So it's interesting that Doty was probably part of a debrief around a real case.
Yeah.
And then is also involved in this sort of, he's inserting himself as, a counterintel guy in this other case.
Yeah, well, maybe when that stuff came up, they're like, well, either he said something or this guy knows. This is just speculation.
Yeah.
And Rositsky apparently handpicked all these people to be part of this operation. I asked more about it once, and he said, well, think of it as a giant, because what he said was the Benowitz thing was one cog in a giant wheel connected to a bunch of other giant wheels that you would never notice. And the only reason it's noticed is because it's UFO people have kind of made it into a big story. Not that it isn't, but there are a lot of other parts of this counterintel that was going on in the late 70s, early 80s before the Berlin Wall fell and all that, that people don't know about. And the only reason this came out is because it had to do with UFOs, so people are interested in that subject, obviously. But what he said, the other thing he said to me later was, imagine the Benowitz operation as a 24-hour-long stage play.
Yeah, it's like you...
And Benowitz is 5 minutes in one scene, not even 5 minutes. That's how much of the entire... Because... when UFO people and researchers, et cetera, hear about this, they're like, oh my God, it's so important. It's like, it was a tiny little piece in a big wheel that was working with a lot of other things to like, here's one more way we can, mess with and vet out Soviet assets. And that's what he was using it for. I don't think Rositsky gave less of a crap about UFOs. All he cared about is what he could do with it. It's another thing I had put on a T-shirt. UFOs are a Swiss Army knife for intelligence. They can use them for anything.
Yeah, we were just talking earlier that there's sort of a Rorschach test.
Yeah.
And you could insert UFO. Like, I find this interesting with like the JFK assassination. If you were a counterintel agent, you would say that the JFK assassination was only, it was like only UFOs. Like, say you wanted to detract from the fact that it was, nuclear, that JFK wanted to defang the American nuclear arsenal, or that he
get rid of the CIA,
get rid of the CIA, and so they were retaliating or whatever. You throw people down the trail with this thing, UFOs, and then you can track the people that talk about it with respect to UFOs. UFOs are sort of a proxy for somebody's kind of irreverence towards, earthly authorities or something, and open-mindedness generally. You can track Soviet spies or traitors or whatever.
Take something that people have a really strong emotional attachment to, but no way to prove any of it, and that's a big ass wrench in the in the toolbox.
Totally.
Because if you're emotionally attached to something, you can be led around by the nose. So sometimes when people get excited, it's like, detach your emotions from this, because you're not going to see the bigger picture if you're just looking at this thing.
Well, not only that, you're making yourself susceptible to counterintelligence.
Exactly.
So
it snowballs,
Totally.
This episode is sponsored by one of my new favorite products, Odoo. This is one of the coolest internet products I've seen lately. It allows you to start a full-scale business from your laptop. It's not just a website builder or a CRM. It's a full suite of tools that all seamlessly integrate and speak to one another. Odoo gives you everything in one connected platform: sales, inventory, accounting, e-commerce. Whatever you need, it works together out of the box. So whether you're selling a physical product, launching a media company like me, running a nonprofit, or scaling a startup, it's all you need in one simple system. What I like is their philosophy. Unity makes creative strength. It's true in systems and it's true in teams. Odoo helps simplify the chaos of running something complex so your creative focus stays sharp. It's really a beautiful and simple product. So act on the idea you have. Don't keep putting it off. You can start with just one app and it's literally free to try. There's no downside. If you want to upgrade later, the service will scale with your needs. Head to odoo.com to get started. That's O-D-O-O, pronounced Odoo. And follow @odoo.official on Instagram or @odoo on TikTok. Now back to today's episode.
So, okay, before we get into the kind of the meta-analysis of how these mechanics work, let's talk about the details. So Moore is basically, his ascendancy is being used against him. We're going to give you secret info if you comply with us.
Yeah.
And then at what point does Moore interact with Benowitz, and at what point does Doty directly interact with Benowitz?
I think, more interacted with him just because through APRO, and it was very soon, I think, after he was contacted, because he said that, there's another part of the story. The reason they met with him after that phone call is he was one of the few, because they sent that letter out to different people, that supposed letter from somebody in the military that had seen a UFO at close range. And he was one of the few that said, this is BS. Before he met with Rositsky and Doty, they gave him one more test. They gave him a memo showing that there was some sort of a UFO sighting, I guess in central or southern New Mexico in the late 40s or early 50s. And it was, I believe it was part of a project called Silver Sky, because the memo was called the Silver Sky Memo. He went and checked it out and found out that was BS too. So when they finally talked to him, they said, you're the only person that you actually went out and found out that this stuff was false. And they kind of, for some reason, they wanted somebody who was had an investigative mind, like could kind of dig out whether something was BS or not, or was a false flag or not, or whatever you want to call it. And that's why they picked him.
I think Bill Moore was a pretty decent UFO investigator. Like if you read the Philadelphia experiment, I don't know. I haven't corroborated whether all of the details that he discusses are right. And I have a reason to believe there's a lot of counterintelligence around the Philadelphia experiment. This is, again, this case in the 1942 where, a ship was rumored to be zapped from a Philadelphia Navy port to Norfolk, Virginia.
Yeah, time travel, whatever.
Time travel, Thomas Townsend Brown. And
there's a movie made of it.
There's a movie
I think Charlton Heston was in it.
And there are rumors that the sailors in the ship were fused to the hull, and you heard all these screams, and then you have this guy coming out later saying he was a time traveler as a result of it.
Yeah, Carlos Allende.
Carlos Allende is the guy who leaked the story to Morris Jessup, who was a pseudonym. The real guy's name was Carl Allen, who was a merchant marine, a Navy merchant marine.
Yeah, Carlos Allende, yeah.
And so, anyway, interesting story. And Bill Moore writes about this whole story in, I think a pretty, hard-headed, maybe he gets some things wrong, but he's a good researcher. I don't think he's a bad researcher. So, but he seems to lend a lot of credibility to the fact that Rositsky and Doty can give him secret information, so he's going to comply.
Or, well, at least somebody that Rositsky knows is going to hand him dossiers of stuff. He had to go, one time he was told, in the middle of this, he said, go to this hotel room in upstate New York. There will be somebody there to meet you. They just gave him an envelope with all these old documents in it and said, you got 20 minutes.
Yep.
Because what can I do? And they said, anything you want, you just can't keep the documents.
Wow.
So he had a 35 millimeter camera. He just hurriedly took pictures of all of them.
Whoa.
And this happened more than once in various forms.
Yep.
And that was the exchange for keeping tabs on people and saying, what this person doing? What are they thinking? As he told me later, and actually he told other people, none of them ever really amounted to anything.
Yeah.
The MJ-12 stuff, the Eisenhower briefing memo, when he first released the report on them in this book called the MJ-12 Papers, the thing actually said compelling but not conclusive. That's all it said. And then after a few years, he said, I don't think almost anything I was given was actually true 100% UFO information.
Yeah.
It was all either around it or completely made up.
Yeah.
And he said he kind of felt used and cheated.
Sure. How does Moore and Doty proceed to trick Benowitz into believing he is detecting more than he is when it comes to alien signals and UFOs?
People are going to argue with me, but as I recall it, and I wrote, Benowitz was his own worst enemy. The only problem was he had people around him not contradicting him and encouraging him, and then occasionally saying something. The only thing I know that Bill Moore did was he was told to give Benowitz a document called the Aquarius document, or memo or something like that. And it said, there was a little different pieces of UFO, examinations of footage. It's like, this looks good, this doesn't, apparently from some government source. And one of Benowitz's, or two of Benowitz's films are mentioned in that. I know that because you look at it and you go, oh, it says, I think Albuquerque or Kirtland or something like that, but they're analyses of his films in part. And they were encouraging. It's like, well, this is unidentified. We don't know what it is. But was told to give that to Benowitz. He said, hand him this document. As far as I know, he never admitted it to me, he never actually went to Paul Bennewitz and said, look into this. This is important. This was leaked to me. He was basically there just to kind of monitor him, as far as I know. But Paul Bennewitz was so excited about what he was seeing and so convinced of whatever he thought became reality that it was really easy just to mislead him with a little push here and there. Well, that sounds interesting, Paul. Why don't you look into that a little further? Instead of, don't worry about that. That's not part of anything. Everything was encouraged as long as it pushed him away from any secret projects or information.
And you see Benowitz start to get more and more fervent in his interest, and he's doing flights around Archuleta Mesa where he thinks maybe there's some underground
They took him up
activity.
there and showed it to him. Because they wanted him to pay attention to that rather than to Kirtland anymore. It's like, let's just draw his attention away from there. And in furtherance of that, and Doty told me this, I think Moore told me this, and then a few people around the area, around the Hickory Apache area. Paul was very excited when he told him that the Air Force had taken him in a helicopter from Kirtland, flown him up to northwestern New Mexico, to the Archuleta Mesa, which is on the Hickory Apache Reservation, and showed him stuff saying, look, we think there's something going on here. They actually put jeeps and like water tanks and all kind of stuff in this place as props, so he would be concentrating on that. The funny thing is that apparently there was some sort of crash up there within that period after that. So there was a stealth fighter, or maybe it was a drone or something that definitely crashed there, but he never took pictures of it close enough where you could tell what it was. Oh no, he got up there after they'd cleaned it up. So you see like this burned area, and Gabe said they went up there and found, broken up brush and evidence that something had been picked up and a pen that said U.S. government property on it. So something happened there that was very important. And maybe they just thought, you know what, this is even better because now he's really going to concentrate up there. And he made drawings of what he thought he saw. And I included those in the book. And they kind of morphed depending on what he was thinking at the time. He had like one version of it. And then he said it was a craft that the aliens had given to the United States government. And the government was flying it and they didn't know how to do it and it crashed. And so it gets more and more Byzantine and complicated, and and his paranoia builds. And
is there a good prosaic explanation for the orbs that he initially saw going over that mountain next to Kirtland? Or
the only thing I can think of, and based on what I was heard and on Chris Lambright's book, X Descending, it was some sort of project either with drones or some sort of unconventional flying objects that had some sort of glow to them. Whether you can ascribe that to having like a lighter than air with a light in it, or Chinese lantern type thing, or some kind of weird energy or something like that, I don't know. But they seemed solid, and they didn't move like airplanes, and they tested them at night.
So how was he detecting any sort of signals to begin with coming out of the base?
Because he was an electronics engineer, and he built things to pick up, I guess, a wide range of radio signals, probably centered on the military bands of signals, not just like FM or AM or shortwave or anything. And he built an antenna array. He had all these machines for analyzing the signal. And he built all this from scratch. Nobody had any of this stuff. Or he jury-rigged some of the stuff from his lab. But he built, apparently, a setup and started listening to transmissions coming from the base, which is a huge problem if you're trying to be a security person at Kirtland. People shouldn't even be listening to this, much less inventing machines and equipment to listen to it in the first place. Because if he's doing it, other people can do it. So that's what they were worried about. But he thought he could pick up, as far as I remember, he thought he could pick up transmissions that aliens were beaming either to each other or to the military or something.
And why did he think whatever he was picking up was alien? Because
it didn't comport with anything he could conceptualize.
So just the fact that it was kind of anomalous. There was no actual
It
message.
might have been, from what I've heard and what I've assumed, which might be wrong, is it was telemetry for missile guidance or something like that.
Okay.
It was microbursts.
Okay.
So they sounded like, and he would slow them down.
Sure.
And he thought he was hearing patterns in it and saying
man.
these are the aliens doing this, and he was using this setup. And Gabe told me about it. He said he saw that setup, but he also saw the setup apparently after J. Allen Hynek showed up. So what Bill told me, and of course everybody's like, well, he's telling you this because it's disinformation. Hynek wouldn't do such a thing. Sometime, I believe in the early 81 or so, maybe even earlier, 80, 81, something like that, J. Allen Hynek showed up at Paul's door with a computer, an entirely built, already made computer, and said, this will help you with the signals. And Bill told me that since Hynek knew that Bill was doing some of this spy stuff somehow, they went to, or he told him enough that Hynek kind of got it. Because, Hynek had been employed by the Air Force since the 1960s. And apparently in the early 80s, he was still on the payroll. He just wasn't doing very much.
Yeah. But it sounds like he was complicit in this whole thing where...
Yeah, but I think that he didn't know what was on the computer. Otherwise, he had a conscience. He might have said, I don't want to do this.
Okay, so they give him the computer. Benowitz then starts to pick up even more on this computer.
So at some point, somebody at the base or at one, any number of intelligence agencies that were that had presence there to make sure that the security was tight, decided, why don't we just give him a computer with stuff on it and let him pick it up and then have it, because he thought the Air Force was cooperating with him, like he was bringing the information they needed. He was, but not the kind that he thought.
So he thought he was doing sort of vital work, security work to decipher these alien signals.
They said, we're interested in what you're doing, Paul. Please keep talking to us. Tell us what you're doing. It's important for national security or whatever. And he's like, oh, okay.
But I think even more explicitly, he picks up certain messages that he interprets as like, we've given the U.S. 8 crafts or so, like specific things.
Yeah, he starts decoding things, and the decodings are basically based on his pareidolia about what should be coming out of those messages.
Pareidolia, by the way, for the audience, is seeing a pattern where it doesn't exist, which is a human tendency.
Yeah. It's an evolutionary thing. You got to see patterns so you can survive.
Yes.
But it does us a disservice when it's things like this.
Yeah, sure.
Because you can make patterns out of stuff that don't exist. So that's what he was doing.
As you know, I'm always on the hunt for things that help me stay sharp, focused, and full of energy while I'm diving into life's mysteries and making this show happen. And I've got to say, Mudwater has completely transformed my mornings. Back in the day, I used to struggle with that post-coffee crash. And let's not even get into the caffeine jitters. Mudwater gave me the smooth, steady energy I was missing. It's packed with functional mushrooms like lion's mane, chaga, and reishi, plus turmeric and cacao, all working together to keep me focused, calm, and grounded. Honestly, it's like coffee went on a yoga retreat and came back zen. What I love most is that it's not just about replacing coffee, it's a whole new ritual. It's a simple, nourishing way to start the day, and I actually look forward to it every morning. Every ingredient is USDA certified organic, vegan, non-GMO, and there's zero sugar. It's energy that doesn't mess with your sleep or make you question your life choices at 3 a.m. Ready to make the switch to cleaner energy? Head to mudwater.com, that's MUDWTR.com, and grab your starter kit today. Right now, our listeners get an exclusive deal up to 43% off your entire order, plus free shipping and a free rechargeable frother when you use code Jesse. That's right, up to 43% off with code Jesse at MUDWTR.com. After your purchase, they'll ask you how you found them. Please show your support and let them know we sent you. Keep your energy natural and refreshing all year long with Mudwater, because life's too short for anything less than clean, delicious energy.
Did he get any other messages? So something about possibly 8 crafts that the U.S. had retrieved?
I'm not sure if the stuff that I put in there in the book, his deciphered code.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's before or after the computer.
Okay.
It might be after because it seems really detailed.
Okay. So what else did he receive generally?
just that there were aliens from another planet. They were here. They were trying to establish a base. They needed Earth women or something. It sounds like a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
To propagate their race. Their planet was dying.
Wow.
All this stuff. And that they were at some point going to take over. And so that's what really scared him. And I think he was saying that before. And this computer just basically said, okay, let's take what he's saying and just crank it up.
And across the street, there maybe are some NSA officials.
Yes, maybe that happened. I mean, the person that told me that was Bill.
Okay.
And since he's my friend, I trust him. The people say this about Bill. It's like, well, why do you trust him? It's like, I've never found him to be lying to me, ever. I've known him for what, 35 years or more?
Well,
never lied to me once.
If anything, his
but
ability to off himself at MUFON and say that he was complicit in wrongdoing is probably maybe some sort of indicator that you should trust him. Also, I don't know why he would make that up. I mean, that seems... If you were to incept signals into a mainframe computer, the NSA would be the ones to do that. I mean, that there's signals intelligence. That's what they do.
Yeah, exactly. So somebody programmed it for him. Hynek brought it to the door. He hooked it up and then started immediately seeing these messages. He also saw pictures. He thought he was looking into the alien planet, into the future and past of the Earth. He had a little oscilloscope, or at least a CRT.
Oh my God!
Analog CRT with with the scans. And
what is CRT?
Cathode ray tube.
Okay.
Like old TV screens.
Yeah, got it.
And somebody had just put this video in there for him. Gabe told me he went over there and saw some of it. He said there were dinosaurs and like old Roman battles and stuff, but they were probably from old movies. But they were all garbled and weird. And Gabe said he saw this, so somebody was beaming this junk at him.
Oh man!
And apparently they set up across the street and to send these signals into the computer that would be decoded in the way the computer was designed to decode them. And he thought it was coming from inside the base because I think they probably just sent him at the same frequency.
And then he starts to kind of lose his mind. Is that right? Or
yeah, as things get worse, he starts losing sleep. He thinks there's going to be some sort of alien invasion. The woman, Myrna Hansen, that he had coming to his house in the 80s, she was talking about being abducted and going to this underground facility, which really that stuff is, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's formed so much of the UFO lore afterward. So a lot of stuff happening at the time that Paul was dealing with just became part of the UFO lore. And yes, there's independent people that have said that this happened to them. I don't know where they get that information. Maybe it's been, disinfo beamed at them, said to them too. I don't know.
Yeah.
But a lot of the tropes kind of started back then. He said there was an alien base underground at the Archuleta Mesa. He went there with a camera and took pictures.
Whoa.
He said of things going in and out of the mountain, but they're just like blurs.
Whoa.
And it could be something, but it could also be camera, artifacts. Who knows? Nothing I've seen of the pictures he took up of the Archuleta Mesa area really amount to. There's no clear Billy Meyer looking picture. But a couple of the videos he took in at Kirtland show. There's one of them that looks like a saucer, kind of like this, and there's a PSA, Pacific Southwest Airlines plane flying behind it. So who knows what that thing was? But as nobody came in and said, Paul, stop, Jesus. Bill said he tried. He did give him that Aquarius document. And it actually mentions access only to MJ-12, which is the first time anybody said anything about MJ-12.
That's interesting.
Was in this fake document, the Aquarius document.
Wow.
And it says, quote, MJ-TWELVE, unquote.
Whoa.
Yeah. So somebody was trying to plant that in the culture then too, like in 1981 or whenever he got this document. But Bill was told to give him this. This is the only documented thing at least by Bill, where he said, they told me to do this, and they told me if I didn't give him that thing that the deal was off. And he read it. He knew what it was. He's like, this is BS. So he went to Paul's office, and he was trained. They gave him spy training, Bill. They had him doing other stuff too. They had him passing mail through and doing, stuff with Soviet spies on our side. spies in the Soviet Union. They would send postcards, and you'd have to like read them on a telephone call exactly, and then take them to another post office and mail it from that post office to the next post office. Spy stuff. But he said that they finally, because he hesitated. It's like, I don't know if I want to do this. He said it was like, you're a kid, and they tell the mafia says, why don't you stand on the corner and look, tell me if this car comes by, and then the next week you're burying bodies, kind of thing. Yeah. It wasn't that bad, but he's like, he kind of just gets wormed into this, this structure, this intelligence structure. So he said that he took finally he said, okay, I'm going to give it to Paul. He goes down to his office, tells, meet me at your office at a certain time. And he takes him, he says, get a radio. And they go in the supply closet, he said, and he turned the radio up. And he gave him the thing and said, I was told to give this to you. Take it with a grain of salt. And he said, as far as he knew, Paul never said anything about it. And he just put it in his safe at work. So he did this with Paul. Paul took it, didn't say anything about it, but it certainly affected his mindset and his thinking. It's like, oh my God, I'm important. They're paying attention to me. Yeah. I'm getting the secret information. What happened was his family got worried about him. They were like, geez, he's not doing his work. He's staying up all the time. He's chain smoking. Like he'd smoke a whole pack of cigarettes over lunch while Bill talked to him. He's like, Paul, it's like, everybody was telling him to calm down while knowing what was going on. They were like, God, Doty said he even told him. Yeah. But he couldn't control, I don't know if you've ever been in a paranoid state where just everything makes sense. Everything is arrayed against you. Every conversation you hear. William Burroughs talks about this. It's a great lecture. He talked about this. But
yeah, I think in UFO world, you can get into this sort of solipsistic mindset where you go, oh, this is all an illusion or whatever. And if there are other beings and it becomes this, you're living in the Da Vinci Code or something. And,
exactly. And he couldn't get out of that loop, and his family was just like, oh my God. So they actually put him in a mental health facility for like a month or so. Because there's these, I've heard people still say, he died in a mental institution or he killed himself. It's like, no, his family was worried about him. They put him in a mental health facility for like a month or two till he calmed down. And when he came out of it, he was still interested in the stuff, but it wasn't running his life.
That's good.
And then I think he realized, probably from talking to his family and maybe even Bill, it's like, just, if you don't want to go to an early grave, please relax.
Yep. And Doty then comes out and admits, I befriended Paul, that was tasked to do that, and I sent him down the wrong path. And I would continuously feed him passage material. Passage material is classic kind of spook,
I don't know if he did or not, but I wouldn't put it past him. I don't know if Bill was privy to that or anybody I talked to was, and Doty didn't tell me that. Maybe because he didn't want to say that at the time.
I just mean passage material, not in terms of documentation. I just mean like wrong information.
Oh yeah. I mean, he could have done that anytime Paul said, like I said before, Paul would say, this is happening, and Doty would think, yeah, you know what? I have indication that that's happening. Maybe you should check it out.
Right.
I mean, that kind of thing. And it just kind of builds on itself.
Yeah. And John Lear, who's obviously implicated in the Bob Lazar story and sort of, says all sorts of insane things around this time.
Yeah, he worked for Air America and all this stuff. So I think John Lear was like Benowitz part 2 because he communicated with Benowitz after this.
Right. So yeah, that's the interesting thing is in some ways John Lear seems like he was fed maybe a ton of disinformation, but he also meets with Benowitz. Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Did you know that?
Yeah.
And then Benowitz
multiple times till Benowitz got mad at him and said he didn't want to talk to him anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I can't remember what the breakup was about, but yeah, he met with Benowitz a few times and just like asked him questions. And
do you think John Lear was subject to the same disinfo as Benowitz, or do you think he was tasked with
both?
Okay.
Not because I could sit here and say that's what happened, but the indications to me is from his actions and what what I was told that when I was told he was met with Benowitz and how Benowitz reacted to him, and also the fact that I think somebody asked Lear at one point about something God, I wish I knew exactly what it was. I know who told me, so I can ask them. But he said, well, John, what about, all this stuff up at, the underground base up at Archuleta Mesa and the Hickory Apache? and this this big firefight and all that. And I don't know if it was that story, but Lear said, "Oh yeah, I made that up." He
Right.
actually said this.
He literally says, "I made that up." Yeah.
In confidence, or at least privately, to this one guy right before one of those first congressional hearings about UFO stuff in I think it was in the early 90s or something that.
Yeah.
It might have been one of the ones that Greer set up. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Lear admitted this, and because of his previous background flying for Air America, which he touted a lot, saying I was one of the he's got an intelligence background.
Yep.
So
CIA cargo pilot.
yeah, so he very well may have been tasked to check up on Benowitz and feed him more stuff after the fact.
But you're giving Jalen Hynek the benefit of the doubt.
Only because what I know of him is that if he knew that's what it was, I don't think he'd have done it.
I'm not so sure. Well, I don't know. I don't have a ton of reason to believe
it's just a
that.
guess.
That my only, I think of that, documentary, UFOs, Past, Present, and Future.
Emin Eggers?
Yes,
Yeah.
Robert Emenegger and Rod Serling's doing the, narration.
I
And-
interviewed Bob a couple of times on my show.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to him.
He was a cool guy. I liked him.
Seems like a cool guy. Well, it seems like he was maybe one of the first examples of this, using UFOs as a strategy to sort of lure people in, because he is in communications with Norton Air Force Base. And I believe he goes there, and everybody there is talking to him about UFOs, and they're telling him that they are going to give him, the
Holloman landing.
The Holloman
footage.
landing, exactly.
Yeah.
Alamogordo earlier, I think in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
and so he gets all excited, and they say they're going to give him footage, and they keep saying they're going to give him footage, and then the footage never really appears, and he is shown a little. He says,
I think he was, or one of his partners, Bob Shartle, or something saw it.
yeah, or Alan Sandler, another guy.
What did you see on the film? Was it color? Was it black and white? Was it
black and white.
It was black and white.
When I saw you, me a black and white friend, but it was nothing other than what we said in the book. We see this thing, this round thing, and it wasn't that stable, funny part. And it landed, and a door opened, and guys come out looking like they were outer space guys.
Yeah,
So-
it was Sandler.
so
So one
he's-
of them actually said they
I
saw
think
it.
even Emenegger says he saw it briefly,
Yeah.
or something, and then you have this video that ends up. You have mostly like this animation rendition in UFOs Past, Present, and Future that they have to do because they don't have the real footage.
Yeah.
But there's also a little bit of footage, and that footage has now been debunked as an F4, and the F4 came out I think in like '59 or something. So it was like it was probably like not well known at the time.
Yeah.
And it was definitely flying around Holloman.
Mm-hmm.
And so I almost feel like the first kind of Rorschach test, throwing people off the trail was that documentary, and Jalen Hynek is
Yeah.
obviously a big part of the documentary. So
Yeah.
was Alan Hynek used in that documentary as well? I don't
Probably,
know.
because he was, through this whole thing, he was still getting a check from the Air Force.
Well, that's
as
what
far
I'm
as I know.
saying. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. So I don't know.
But
Yeah.
does that mean you know what you're doing? Does that mean somebody tells you everything that's going on when you're getting a check?
I don't know, but one other data point about Jalen Hynek is, Jacques Vallée was like his kind of understudy, his assistant.
Yeah.
Jacques Vallée finds this pentacle memo in the Blue Book files.
Yeah.
And he goes to Jalen Hynek and he's like, what the fuck? Because the pentacle memo is like this whole, Battelle Memorial Institute secret UFO research program that is looking at, these aerial hotspots, presumably around nuclear, if you look at what was happening at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Jalen Hynek is like, wait, what's going on? Like, you're not allowed to, apparently you weren't allowed to mention the pentacle. This is written by a guy named Howard C. Cross. You weren't allowed to mention that program in the Robertson memo or Robertson panel, which creates the Robertson memo, which is basically the constitution of Blue Book. It creates the mandate for Blue Book to kind of explain away and rationalize, this stuff.
Yeah.
And then Vallée comes out saying, I was convinced that Jalen Hynek actually, didn't know about the pentacle memo and this other thing, but like, I don't know. There are all these cases where Jalen Hynek has to like play dumb, and I'm like, I don't know, dude. I think you might have known a thing or two because he seems like a smart guy.
Yeah.
So.
Oh no, I don't think he was dumb, but not being told something doesn't mean you're dumb. It just means you don't know it.
No, I know, but it's like maybe 3 times where he could be complicit.
Yeah.
In,
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, how many other times? Those are just 3 times that I know.
I'm pretty
off the
sure
top
he
of my
showed
head.
up with the computer. I'm pretty sure he gave it to Benowitz. I don't know. The crux is, did he know what was on the computer? Did he know what did he know and when did he know it?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
There's no way to find that out. I tried to ask QFOs when I was writing the book, do you have any correspondence with Hynek during this time? And they said they'd help me like 3 times and they never responded. They probably just thought I was a crazy person.
Yeah. Well, far be it from I to try to off, a UFO legend in Jalin Hynek. Like he's definitely contributed to the field.
I don't know. I'm going to err on the side of like what I'd like to think, which is basically my whole MO, because unless something convinces me that something's one way, I'm going to think the thing that makes me feel better until I get contravening it. Because if I don't, I go down the paranoid path.
Yeah, but I view the thrust of your work as inconvenient truths that you are laying out before people, and I like that. I mean, that's an interesting way.
Well,
I
checked up on the stuff myself. That's why I believe it. If I hadn't checked up on it, if I hadn't written Project Beta, I would probably doubt it more. Because I didn't experience. I wouldn't be experienced what I experienced. I talked to the people I talked to. Yes, I don't know if I was lied to. With Doty, I know I was lied to a few times. So like 95% or more, 97% of what he told me is not in the book, because there's no way to tell. And the stuff where I just got it from him, it was relevant to the story. I said, Doty's the only person that told me this.
One other interesting data point is in 1982, Rick Doty gets in touch with another UFO researcher, Linda Moulton Howe, and she's shown a bunch of documents around presidential, knowledge of UFOs and aliens, as well as Project Garnet, which involves accelerated evolution of humanity with alien intervention. Is that right?
That I don't remember.
Okay. Well,
see, a lot of stuff I wrote about, more stuff has come out since then, some of which is accurate, some of which isn't.
Yeah.
And you may very well be right. I do not know what was in those documents. I thought it had something to do partially with some of the cattle mutilation stuff she was doing, but it was a bunch of different things.
Yeah, no, well, I believe it had both, but this is based partially.
She was very excited. I actually talked to Tom Adams, I think, afterwards, who was a cattle mutilation researcher, and she went up and visited them a couple days after that, and she was like over the moon. She's like, "Oh my God, I saw all this great stuff. It's so important." And
right.
So she took the bait at the time. I don't know what she thinks about it now.
Yeah. Well, she was later interviewed in a documentary, and she was like, "I just don't want you to paint this, that the whole UFO thing is BS. I was tricked in this one instance, but the idea that UFOs are a cover for just prosaic technology is totally wrong. In fact, it's the opposite. Prosaic technology is often used as a cover for UFO." It's an interesting discussion.
Yeah. It's probably both. In fact, it's demonstrably both.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it's a sort of
but
convection current.
It's separate from the UFO issue itself, which people think that after I wrote that book, like, you think it's all like military. It's like, no.
Yeah.
There's no way that the entire UFO phenomenon is military or intelligence connected.
So
it's
you think
just used.
Some of the UFO stuff is genuinely anomalous, and by genuinely anomalous, I mean not explained by prosaic atmospheric conditions.
Oh, definitely.
And not explained by military tech, advanced military
Definitely.
tech. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many hundreds of thousands of things that have no connection with military anything.
I agree with that too. And I find it frustrating that this case that you write about so well needs to be contended with as a modality of how UFOs are used from a counterintelligence perspective, and you need to have that sets of goggles on when viewing everything in the UFO world. But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah,
In some ways, that's maybe even the goal. That like you're losing if you think the whole thing is fake.
Yeah, well, there's that belief thing again. If you believe something so strongly, that's all you're ever going to see. And so there's all kinds of opinions about it, whatever people's beliefs are. But the Project Beta, I mean, I wrote it because I made the proposal and the publisher said, let's do this one.
Yeah.
Patrick Weege and Simon & Schuster said, let's do this one. I said, okay. But so many different weird accusations I've had about it. It's like, oh, you're cooperating with the government. It's like, no, I was trying to tell a story. That's like saying that Vincent Bugliosi cooperated with Manson. He's just writing a story about it.
Yeah.
A very opinionated story.
But that's a weird analogy, because I think Bugliosi, who was the lead prosecutor of the case, and wrote Helter Skelter about Manson, got a lot
Gerardo
wrong.
Rivera was cooperating with Manson. There you go.
Okay.
They had that weird interview online.
That's fine.
On TV.
Because the Bugliosi thing, like if you read like Chaos by Tom O'Neill, you kind of are like, Bugliosi had some ulterior motive. With the whole thing.
Oh, he wrote it. Didn't he write he wrote a book about the Kennedy assassination that said that Oswald did it and there's no way around that. And
that's right.
Yeah.
So for your sake, I just want you to be clear. It was no ulterior motive for you.
Yeah. No, not for me. What am I saying? It's if you report on anything, it means that you agree with it or disagree with it. It's like, no, I don't agree or disagree with what I put in the book. I think a lot of stuff that happened was absolutely morally wrong and shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, of course. You're documenting.
But I'm not going to put that in the book or say anything about it. I've had people like at when I first started doing this and lecturing about it, like, why don't you why didn't you just say how wrong it was? It's like, what am I supposed to do? Tell you what is moral and is not? Yeah. I think you got a better sense of what's right and wrong than, I would give you. That I would be assuming.
It's also
I didn't. I mean, you should know as much of the facts as you can, and you make up your own decisions based on that.
I think you're also in UFO world, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure if you polemicize everything, because you're setting yourself up as the arbiter of right and wrong and truth and untruth. And then you're going to get stuff wrong. You're dealing with the most speculative stuff. So there were times where I've been tempted to make videos. Like the most steel manning I've done are like, it's like I did this piece on Harold Malmgren, and I'm probably going to come up with like a rebuttal on, certain. Oh yeah,
because there was that big Dean Johnson thing about it,
which I'm happy to address now. I think it's excruciatingly obvious that Harold Malmgren was CIA.
Yeah.
And he says my agency a bunch of times, and his daughter goes the State Department. And he's holding Paul Mellon's walking stick, which he didn't buy at a yard sale.
Yeah.
And, so Paul Mellon's one of the founders of the CIA. He says Tom Farmer is his best friend, the general counsel of the CIA.
Yeah.
He's this like spooky trade representative in all these cases. He was helping formulate the presidential daily briefing.
Yeah.
So the guy was CIA. You cannot.
A lot of debunking is based on the most likely thing, especially with UFOs. The most likely thing is a prosaic explanation, so that's the explanation, and we're going to do anything we can to work yourself towards that prosaic explanation, because you work from a point of view rather than from
I've seen
which UFO people are completely guilty of.
I've seen his diary, and I don't think it's a fake diary. And Richard Bissell is all over it. Richard Bissell's the founder of Area 51, and the guy who he claimed to get briefed on otherworld technologies from. And he's, even D. Dean Johnson admits that he's in his phone book or whatever. So there's connectivity there. He says in a 2024 interview before me, I was at the IDA, but that was a cover for my real work for the Joint Chiefs and the Pentagon.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is everybody in the audience believes that, probably the CIA killed JFK. And if you really connect the dots, who called the shots there? It was Alan Dulles at the Brown Brothers Harriman. So you're talking about this time where you can't just do a FOIA from the FBI and know that if the person who got their Q clearance through the CIA, you have no idea if they have their Q clearance. That's ridiculous. So I just think that plus like a few anecdotes about certain people not being aware of him or whatever is insane as a sort of like whole debunk. And then there were a lot of
From what I know of it, it sounds like he did I think he and a few other people tried. No, it wasn't him, but the Travis Walton case.
Yeah.
And they talk about this fire tower, and it's like it was right next to the road. It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah,
it's over a hill. You think they're so stupid they don't know what a fire tower is?
Yeah.
Just stuff like that. I'm not saying the whole story is true because of that.
I'm not either.
The debunk is so ridiculous on the face of it. It's
yes.
One of my friends stopped talking to me because I said, get better evidence if you're going to debunk.
No, it's true. Like I like debunks. I like skepticism. It's not like a.
Oh, I don't not want to see a debunk.
No,
I want to see a
good debunk.
Well done one.
I agree.
Which takes as much as, not everything, but takes as much into account as you can and answers all the different data points.
I agree. No, it's like Kendrick and Drake, disses back and forth. Except it's great if you do the debunk, and then I'll do the debunk of the debunk, and we'll get better, and we'll get to the truth. And if you win, fantastic, because we're getting close to the truth. So I think it's all good and it's all love. But it's not a good debunk in this case. It's just not. No. And then there are issues with the bluegill, triple prime. I think according to Jeffrey Cruikshank, who I'm in touch with, who's analyzed this stuff really deeply, apparently Johnson's actually kind of really scared. He realized he got a lot wrong when it came to that the booster trajectory could not have, it wasn't at all near the plume.
Right.
And then it's funny, you have disagreements between the debunkers now, where my buddy Merrick von Randenkamp, who I think is great, but I think he's wrong in this case, said it was the instrumentation pod, and Dean Johnson's like, no, it's not the instrumentation pod, it's the booster. And then Jeff Cruikshank shows that it's not the booster or the instrumentation pod.
Yeah.
So I think they're sort of running
hold on to
themselves
thing
in
like
circles.
a dog with a bone until it's obvious that they don't have it anymore.
That's right. So anyways, all of that's to say, I could be wrong. I am not the arbiter of truth. I'm covering things.
Yeah.
I do feel a little more inclined to defend a guy who just died, who's 89 years old, who to me, this is probably the softest, most qualitative point I'll make, but just pattern matches to a great statesman who really helped the U.S. in an earnest way over decades and was kind of a quiet operator.
Yeah.
So that's all I'll say on that.
Yeah.
But
I see an analogy of how I feel about Bill Moore. It's like I know him, I know his motivations, I know his political stance, I know his moral code, and all of it fits with what he said.
Yeah.
And it also fits with how upset he gets with people that get it all wrong and that haven't been through it.
Well, I empathize with that or sympathize. And I'll even say this now. I would bet that at
I'm a horrible dupe.
No, for sure. Well, I would say I would bet that in the future I will have to retract a thing that I cover. Of course, I mean, you are dealing with the most speculative topic on the planet.
Yeah.
I mean,
I have too.
So it's like I will get stuff wrong.
Got to be willing to be wrong.
I guarantee I will get stuff wrong. Yeah. That's the only guarantee. And then if I get stuff right, then it's like the most important stuff ever, because it's like so uncorrelated with the consensus reality that you're contributing in this exciting way. So I think that's the way you have to view everything. You can't take yourself too seriously and attach your ego to any of this stuff.
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, it's really hard to detach your ego from whatever opinion or research you've done.
So getting back to the core story.
Okay.
So Rick Doty then comes out after this whole saga, and he says that I am now on the side of the truth. And you see him on, UFO Twitter or whatever, and you see him, getting interviewed on Gaia and, saying we have this many alien races and these were these crashes that really happened.
They see these extraterrestrials, these 4.5 foot tall, gray colored entities.
He even recently said that Lou Elizondo was part of Space Force Disinformation or something. And so he's going after some of the other, whistleblowers in UFO world. What's up with Rick Doty now, and is he at all trustworthy?
The first chapter of that book that I gave you, It Defies Language, the title of the chapter is You Play the Game or You Get Nothing. And I believe, and what that means is you can be paranoid that somebody's going to tell you BS or disinfo or lead you down a path or whatever. But if you're not in the game playing, if you're not sitting at the table playing cards with people that are just handing you bad cards all the time and occasionally a nice one, you'll never get anything. So, and I think that applies to Doty, maybe a little less now than it used to, because I think less of what he says is either true, relevant, or whatever. And I think that's mainly because he likes messing with people. That's his personality. He's a troll. He likes it. He likes messing. I mean, as far as I can tell, he probably won't want to talk to me again after this. He made a statement a few years ago. He never wanted to talk to me again.
Wow.
Because I said something about the Serpo thing, where apparently there was some exchange with some other planet in some other star system.
Yeah,
and
this was a document leak.
It was more like an info leak that was coming through a couple of sources on the internet.
And it involves like hydrogen isotopes or something, and exotic propulsion, and some spooky science. And
that I'm not sure of. All I remember was Basically, it was like the last scene in Close Encounters where a bunch of people from the Earth go to another planet and then some of the aliens come here. So the Serpo thing was Planet Serpo sent a bunch of aliens here and we sent a bunch of humans to their star system in an exchange in the 1970s sometime.
Do you think any of this is, have you heard of Cicada 3301?
No.
It's okay. So it's this weird, like, online scavenger hunt puzzle that involved complex mathematics that was presented in 2014. And I'm going to screw up some of the details, but like very high level, I think it involved, like, you had to solve it. You needed a serious math, aptitude.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that the whole puzzle was set up by the NSA or CIA, and it was like a recruitment tool.
Yeah.
Do you think some of this stuff that's coming out through Doty or other people is some sort of initiation path? Or do you think it is all passage material to catch bad actors or a Rorschach test to test people's belief structures? Or what do you think the purposes are?
I don't think it's so much that anymore. It's more like when I first saw that article in 2017, the New York Times article, the Cain Blumenthal thing, with Elizondo in it, the first thing I thought was, what new project are they trying to ingrain within trying to what's it called, mix with the UFO subject, and for what purpose? So I didn't think it was a purpose.
Do you have a top candidate for what that project might be? And do you think that the 2017 article was sort of the same variety as whatever happened to Benowitz?
No, I don't think it was a Benowitz thing, because we live in a different time where information is disseminated in a completely different way than it was then.
But do you think you don't think those 3 videos that came out?
I don't think they were faked. I'm pretty sure they weren't faked.
Okay.
But I think, Rorschach blot again, Swiss Army knife again, get something that everybody's interested in. There's a lot of emotion around it. There's no real idea about what it might be, and then use it for whatever you need to use it for, either to deflect or direct attention. And I think, and this is just me being dumb, at the time, and I think still, although in the last few months it's probably messed up now, I think there was a Cold War going on with China, and they're just trying to keep it from going hot. I have a friend that lives there near Los Alamos. This friend told me, "You want a job?" And I said, "What?" She said, "Los Alamos is hiring." I said, I don't have any of those skills." It was a woman. She said, you can write English competently, can't you? It's like, yeah. You edit video. They need those people. I said, why? Why does Los Alamos need those people? She said, there's a huge nuclear arms race going on right now, and they're building bombs like mad. And I just thought it sort of coincided with what all this big buildup with and I don't know if it's directly related, but I think the UFO subject right now is being used as a fulcrum to figure out what people think, where people's attention can be drawn. I mean, it's just, I see it as this giant, like, social experiment, seeing, how can we use this to our advantage?
Right.
And on top of that, there's a technology advantage. There's a advantage where you have some technology that might look like that, and that can be, attention can be directed towards or away from that. And I know that sounds vague, but I'm not privy to that information. I mean, you probably had other people on here that probably know a lot more than I do about that. But my suspicion is that it's being used for political gamesmanship, covering up defense tech, black projects, all that stuff.
Well, it's definitely being allowed to be amplified at the very least. Yeah. And I look at some of the people,
and I think it's metastasized, and that it's all over the place now, because somebody probably thought, let's just do this little thing, announces, because I guess the time has come, and it's become this big thing. Yeah, the other thing I think, and I won't interrupt you, but the other thing I think is it is crowdsourcing expertise around the subject. So people with the training and the equipment and the motivation, but were scared to before, are going to concentrate on the UFO subject and put some expertise to bear on it, which was was discouraged in the past. It was,
Yeah.
Now that stigma has been lifted.
I think that's right. Like, I think about this.
So that's a good thing that's happened.
It's a total
from this.
good thing. I also think, like, one of the things that I got interested in through the UFO subject, but in some ways, is the most out of left field and uncorrelated with kind of consensus ufology, like really came out of left field, was the Townsend Brown stuff around like, gravity manipulation experiments.
Oh
in the
yeah,
50s and
he
60s.
said that he was really impressed with your like digging into that Townsend Brown stuff. Bill Moore interviewed T. Townsend Brown.
That's why I want to talk to him, because I know he did, and he made that movie, The Cosmic Conspiracy, about
I
Philadelphia
may
experiment.
have his notes from that. I'll look for them for you.
Thank you, man. That means a lot. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. So, but with the Brown stuff,
people don't know who he is.
Well, I'm convinced that, I've signaled to no end that, like, if I am doing anything that like seriously hurts like American national security or like, then like I want to know.
Yeah.
But nobody said anything. So it's just like, sort of empty on the other end. So at that point, somebody, I imagine, has made a call on high that like, we're going to allow some of that stuff to come out too, even though, completely organically looked into it and kind of, I think, corroborated a lot of his stuff.
Yeah.
And somebody probably made a call that like, I'm not like extremely well versed in like some of the high level theoretical physics around it, that at least saying this guy created this topological physics effect, we're probably past the point of like that being okay. Not okay.
The Byfield Brown.
The Byfield Brown effect. Yeah. So you could be right that like there are these like surprising but adjacent things that UFOs give you a framework for.
Yeah.
That like,
Maybe whoever in the Navy or whatever was hoping for that.
Yeah, they want like energy unlocks and they want more surface area on new
Even if
propulsion
we don't know what
mechanisms.
UFOs are, it's going to push Bud Hopkins of all people.
You have a whole secret science kind of initiation.
Having a recording of
whatever,
him from 1987 or something. I videotaped him for a documentary, and he said ufology or UFOs are dragging us kicking and screaming into the science of the 21st century.
It is, yeah.
And it's kind of happening now.
I agree. Well, John Mack would talk about, head of the Harvard Psychiatry Department, friends with Bud Hopkins.
Yeah.
Who would see all these, abductees. He would talk about how UFOs would inspire tech because it would look like you had the airships of the 1890s or whatever. It would look like tech that was just about to come out. And, Bill Lear is quoted in 1956. He was the father of John Lear and invented the first,
Learjet.
Yeah, Learjet, first private jet, basically. And he said, I believe anti-gravity is possible because UFOs display them. And so that to me is just this really important thing where
I've
it's
got
like
kind of a chapter on anti-gravity in Project Beta, actually.
That's right.
About that memo from the British, whatever, Society of Gravity Research or something. And it was released sometime. The copy I saw was stamped Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on
There
it.
you go.
And it missed about like 5 pages. Like there's this big legend about the missing 5 pages about where it's like it was achieved in the mid-century and then it cuts off and then it like.
Well, we know that Wright Airfield was sponsoring the Chapel Hill Conference in 1957 at University of North Carolina with the top theoretical physicists in the world. And at the same time, the UNC Chapel Hill was sponsoring Townsend Brown's work on anti-gravity. We know that Wright Airfield had a dedicated team of people working on anti-gravity, which included Lewis Whitten, father of Ed Whitten, who was at Martin Corporation's RAAS, their anti-gravity division. And he says in an interview live that we have tape of, where he goes, I was hired to do gravity by Wright Airfield, and that's what I did.
The reason there was a laboratory at Wright Field was to find out what we were doing and to help us do it. And I got a contract from Wright Field to do it, to do gravity, which I did very happily.
And you have Josh Goldberg, who's a PhD from Syracuse, who's a top physicist, also working on the theoretical underpinnings of anti-gravity.
Yeah.
So we know that this stuff was extremely in vogue in the 50s.
And who knows? It may have been
knows?
done or partially done. I have a friend that was in the Air Force, and he said that when the stealth fighter lands, people go in and pull panels out of it and put them in briefcases and go away. And he said the rumor was that some of those were anti-gravity, just to help it fly in a different way that, not total anti-gravity, but to help the avionics.
Yep.
That's a rumor.
That is possible. I go back and forth on that with like the B-2, for example, where I don't see a ton of hard evidence that the Paul
there never is, but maybe that rumor was given to me just to see who would talk about it and where that would come from. It's just one of those things where you pour dye down like 50 pipes and you see where the dye comes out,
Yeah. Well, I track the Brown stuff pretty closely, and I think his work did make it into the B-2, but the aspect of his work that made it into the B-2 is electric fields and their ability to manage airflow over an airframe and confer a tactical advantage when it comes to reducing the lift to drag ratio.
Right. Okay.
So that's all I've ever found on a really first principles level. And then there's a bunch of
that might be it. That might have been what the guy was talking about.
I think so. But
maybe it's mixed in with the Brown legend because of that.
Yeah. Well, I know that I'm pretty sure 95% that Brown stuff made it into the B-2 bomber. In fact, Floyd Odlum, who is the majority owner of Northrop, who funded Brown's work in the 60s, paid Brown $4,000, or I don't remember, $2,000, $4,000 a month, his family, the same amount, until he died.
Yeah.
Until the 80s.
Yeah.
So
when
I mean,
that
to
on
me
Catalina or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly. Good memory. Yeah. So I don't know. It's fascinating. Yeah. UFOs really are. You've made this analogy to me on the phone before. It's like if you have a bunch of pipes, and the pipes represent, possible leaks in intelligence. You pour some dye in the pipes and you see where the dye goes.
Yeah.
And UFOs, I think, are used as a tactic for that, where it's like you sprinkle in a UFO here, that's,
or a
shouldn't be
rumor
there.
about a UFO or some case or whatever, and you see it's like, don't talk about this. Then you see who talks about it.
You see who yeah, exactly. And then you see who's trustworthy.
It's funny, a long time ago while I was working on this book and before that, from knowing Bill, if somebody tells you don't talk about this, I always think it's a test.
Me too. I always think, and that's happened to me before. It's happened to me on a thing that was later debunked publicly.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I know you're telling me this because you want to see if I'm going to leak it.
Stuff about the Tic Tac incident and pilots whose names hadn't been released yet. I was told, don't talk about this.
You were.
Yeah. And then like 6 months later, bam, their names are out there.
Yeah.
And I think whoever told me.
So in your case, it was true.
Yeah, it was true.
So you were given like David Fravor's name before the Tic Tac incident or something?
I think Alex Diedrich and a couple others.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I talked to Alex Diedrich later, but I didn't tell her that.
Can you say who gave you that information?
Nope.
There you go. You passed the test to whoever did that. That's wild. Crazy. Interesting.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And it doesn't mean I'm hooked into any like great network or anything, but that's, and it used to be a lot this would happen. Now about once or twice a year, somebody will tell me.
Yeah.
Lynn Buchanan, who I've known for a long time, the Army remote viewer.
Yeah.
He told me like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago that he had met with an alien. Wow. And he said, but don't talk about this to anybody. I was like, why'd you meet with the alien? He said, well, they wanted to see if I could communicate with it because I was one of the remote viewers. He said, but don't mention it. I was like, all right.
He said
then
that?
Like 5 years later, he said it online somewhere. So I can say it now.
Whoa. Really?
Yeah.
So he's still on record claiming that he's met an alien.
Yeah.
The remote
At least
viewer,
I hope it came out because I saw it later. He had mentioned it in somebody's interview or on a podcast or something.
Where did he meet the alien?
I don't know. He didn't tell me. It was probably on a base somewhere. At least he wanted me to think that.
Wow.
I don't know Lynn really well, but I interviewed him in like 97 or something. So I've kind of we've been meeting every once in a while since then, and every once in a while he'll. That's the only thing he ever told me. Don't say it. Don't mention it. Wow. And I said, why'd you tell me? He said, it's for your information.
Wow.
But there's so many little bits and pieces of information like that just float around. And I think a lot of them are just kind of like throwaways of something that used to be important.
Yeah.
But it isn't anymore. But then they become this lore in the UFO community, and then they just stick and they grow. And, it's fertile ground for any weird rumor like this to grow.
Do you suspect, like, Diana Pasulka came out with a quote where she was friends with Chris Bledsoe, who had all these UFO interactions. By the way, I'm not in any of the drama. I love Diana Pasulka and I love Chris Bledsoe. I think they're both great.
I'm the same way.
So, but Diana Pasulka came out and she said, I think Chris Bledsoe is a modern Paul Bennewitz. Chris Bledsoe claimed to, have an interaction with this goddess Hathor and see also an alien craft and
And a bunch of government people are very interested in him, which is, I think, pretty demonstrably true.
No, that is demonstrably true. He'll say like,
kind of the same dynamic, I guess.
So do you think it is the same dynamic? Do you think they're just genuine friends, or like, what do you think?
I think whoever is interested in the subject thinks he may be a key to the answer or part of it. And when that happens, then they just become friendly until I've had this happen, and you probably have too. Somebody comes from the government and tells you something that nobody else knows, or very few people know. And then they say, I'm telling you this for, Lynn didn't do this because we'd known each other for years, but because they want to flatter your ego and get your confidence and find things out.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that, Sam Evan or whoever the people that are talking to him are like, we're going to get all of his information and throw him down, throw him out with the trash. No, I think they're genuinely interested.
Yeah.
And they genuinely think some useful information can come from him. And if they're friendly with him, they can get some of this information that could be useful, either both for their own personal quest and knowledge, and also for whoever they might be working with or for.
Totally. I don't think,
not to say that any of those people, all those people are wonderful and moral, but
yeah, but I don't think you can immediately jump to the conclusion that they are modern Rick Doty's either. I think
no, it's a different dynamic.
You can be in the government and earnestly want disclosure, and usually if you're in the government, there are caveats to your earnest desire for disclosure that involve national security. But I don't paint
them with all of them with this evil brush.
I don't think
that's not how the world works.
I don't think you can a priori impugn anybody's motives unless they prove to be really, bad actors.
Yeah. And if they do, and they're working in intelligence, they're not always bad actors. It's always something or other. And that's why I think, they said, what do you think of Richard Doty? It's like, I don't hate him.
Yeah.
I don't think he's evil. I just think he was doing his job, and he likes messing with people, and that's it.
Also,
and what he did, some of the things he did were morally wrong, and he knows it.
Also, if we have, take at face value that we had a remote viewing program for 23 years, at the very least, we probably have covert remote viewing programs now, and take at face value that some of that remote viewing was effective. You have a guy in North Carolina who is claiming these like remarkable stories around kind of a miracle healing that he's experienced, and messages that he's getting involving prophecies. If you take the first thing as a real intelligence modality that obviously needs to be corroborated by other intelligence modalities, you're going to take seriously this dude in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And you're going to be probably very interested in that.
You've got an antenna up, and you're correlating all kinds of different information, most of which might be BS.
Sure.
But the stuff that isn't is worth all the others combing through this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing I've found too, I don't know if you found this, but sometimes people inside the government are more conspiratorial than people on the outside. They're like, you assume that
because they've seen it.
That's right.
They see it all the time.
Yeah.
Once you're in this for anything where you get a little glimpse into how some famous person or some, somebody that not too many people know, or a government operative, when you see what's going on with them, just get a little glimpse of it, you realize how much what we all see and in the news and all that has already been decided like months or years before. And it's not like, it's not some conspiracy. It's just the way the world works.
Yeah.
You and I are only privy to a certain amount of information, and other people are privy to less, and other are more, or way more. And it's kind of our you and I are interested in, it's like, what are those people above us doing? What is coming down the road? How is that going to affect us? What does the past look like because of that? What does the future look like because of that? Who does it affect? Should I be emotional about this? Is there a moral issue with this? I want to know all these things. And so I've got antenna up just like these weirdo government people, and I've learned things from them too. Just how to operate and how to think. And part of that, like you said, is being a little bit paranoid, but only a little bit, because I've been a lot paranoid for about a year, and I didn't like it.
A lot paranoid's never good. I made this documentary with David Grush in September of 2023 after he testified before Congress. He said that he, gave over I think hundreds of pages, maybe over 1,000 pages to the, intelligence community inspector general. experienced reprisals based on his blowing the whistle. And he brought forward 40 people directly to the ICIG who had, worked on this stuff firsthand, and we're still in this sort of liminal space, even though he did all that, which is kind of crazy.
I just wanted to put enough out there, touch on all the most sensitive parts, like the biologic side and like things that really need to come out.
Yeah.
But I don't want to overly disclose because it's not my job.
I don't know him well. I don't even know if I know the details about what he was saying, except to, shore up that the government is interested in the subject, has been for a long time and a lot deeper than we think.
Yeah, well, the substance of what he said is that we have non-human bodies, pilots of craft. We have, craft in our possession that we have.
Okay, now I'm remembering.
Yeah, crashes on record. He talks about the Magenta crash, 1933. He even kind of talks about, possible agreements, I believe, in the Ross Coulthard interview. Mm-hmm. And then he says he has all these firsthand witnesses. And again, I know him to have a very eidetic sort of memory and to be a very, intense kind of, he has mild autism, researcher. So he does, definitely not fit the pattern of some of these other really slick and smooth, savvy guys. So it's interesting. But
the mistake I think people make with Grush and other people is that they want to know if they're telling the truth or not. It's like, that's not the question. I think the question is what they're saying relevant, and can connections be made with what they say to other things that things have been said, and also documentation if you can get it. It's just kind of this, I keep using the word concatenation, but it's a concatenation of all this stuff together. And when somebody says, well, I think that person's lying, it's like, why? Because he said this. It's like, he said like 500 things.
Yeah.
So you're saying everything he said is a lie based on this one thing you think is a lie, or have you proven is a lie, or is wrong or inaccurate? That's not how the world works.
No.
It's especially not how the UFO world works.
Yeah. I think it's tough being in that whistleblower position, because the more you say, the more surface area exists on, the more falsifiable everything
There's
is.
More ways for people to get their hooks in and pull you apart. Yeah.
And
it's going to happen.
It's not like you're commenting on, you're not like a sports commentator on ESPN.
Yeah.
People are like, this is the truth. And if you say one wrong thing.
Well, that's different, because I always had that analogy I look at that analogy people made. If this was brought into a court of law, then, it'd be proven. It's like, no, it wouldn't, because we know about murders and robberies and stuff. This is dealing with something we can't bring in a lab and prove, and not many people had experience with. So it's a whole different thing. And it's throwing all these different definitions we have. And, I hate the word ontology, but throwing everybody's ontology into question. It's like, how much of this are you going to let into your life? How much of this is relevant to you? Is it just like talking about movies and TV shows or something, or does this mean more? I think it means way more, but I also don't know how much of this stuff much more of it is going to come out, because I think that every time the government says, hey, let's look at UFOs for a while, when the usefulness of looking at it and having it in the public is gone, bam, it's gone. And then suddenly everybody's like, well, you were just going to tell us what it was. And this has been the longest and the strongest I've ever seen it go on. And so I don't know what the end game is, but I have a really strong feeling that as soon as whoever gets what they need to get, or it's not useful anymore, that faucet's going to be turned off. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to see something, although the disclosure thing still kind of irritates me, because my one quote about it, and I keep saying it, and I've been saying it for years, disclosure is like asking the parent that always lies to you to tell you the truth just this one time, and if they don't tell you what you want to hear, they're lying.
I love that. Well, there are two vectors, though. There's like, is the government ever going to like let some of this stuff ultimately out in the way of like showing you a craft?
And what do they know?
And what do they actually know? Like, do they actually know anything as far as like some metaphysical worldview that it's super concrete, as opposed to, maybe not. Maybe it's just very ephemeral for them.
It's too much to admit it, because it's not explainable in terms that people would understand. So what's the point? And it's much more useful the way it is now, which is that Swiss Army knife that I was talking about.
Yeah, but I do think, so there are two different vectors. There's the government vector. I do think if we just followed up on some of David Grush's face value claims, that would be like really exciting if we could like corroborate, some of those. And it's crazy that it still exists in this liminal kind of space.
Well, the UFO exists in a liminal space, so it drags everything else along with it.
Right.
I mean, that's the model it's coming from, so it's going to be fighting that the whole time.
Yeah, right, sure.
Prove this liminality to me. Break, collapse the waveform. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Well, then you're getting into deeper stuff, which is there's a government vector, and then there's like a belief consensus reality vector, and like.
Most people believe there's aliens and exist and UFOs are real. And all. Most people believe that already.
Yeah, no, it's like probably over 50% of America.
Yeah.
So if there's some other like version of reality that is egregoric in nature, where like you are literally,
going to create
manifesting things in your purview, then the amount of momentum that I see now has to turn into something. And I don't know what that turns into.
I don't know either. But I like that Whitley Strieber quote where he said the government was keeping it secret because if enough people believed in it, would allow it in.
Fascinating.
I think he said that in
Communion?
No, it wasn't in Communion.
Okay.
It was in his Majestic. It was his semi-fictional account of the Roswell crash and everything after it.
Right.
Really good, a lot of metaphors in there which are still relevant, and I still go back to.
I love it. Well, I'll check that out.
Have you had Whitley on?
I have.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was great.
He's always a good interview. And I was at Contact. I got to speak at Contact. I wasn't scheduled.
Amazing.
But I got up on stage because Dean Alioto showed his film Alien Perspective. And one of the first things I said when they asked me for a statement, I said, and I've said this before, why I believe, like people say, do you believe Whitley Strieber? I said, I believe him in the way I believe, the Beatles or the Foo Fighters or Van Gogh or, Jackson Pollock.
He's a great artist.
He's a great artist telling you the truth of how he sees something that has affected him.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the case of, when it comes to a lot of experiencers.
And then people say, well, then he just made it up. It's like, no, art doesn't come from nothing. It comes from the artist's feelings, his or her life experience, everything. And the way Whitley's explaining to us is the way an artist would explain the abduction phenomenon to us. And it's in a way that nobody else talks about it like he does. And I've enjoyed it from the beginning.
Well, that's a beautiful note to end on. Greg Bishop, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your work. Everybody go out and buy Project Beta as well as It Defies Language. And thank you, man.
Thanks a lot.
All right.